They say ease is born of effort's first breath, and some call that a riddle of the earth, a truth whispered from one generation to the next. In a narrow valley beneath a ridge of old stones, a woman named Mara listened to that whisper and rose at first light. The morning pulled her out, and the day waited for what she would do next. Mara owned only a thin strip of earth where others saw only stubborn rock and wind. She knelt each morning to loosen the soil, finding a rhythm in small, steady motions that felt like building rather than merely working. Her hands remembered the motion, and the land answered in the smallest ways. This is where she would begin. She planted a single seed and marked it with a flat stone, as some do when they trust more than they understand. Some say her neighbors laughed and called it folly, for the seed would not bring riches in a night, and many needed immediate bread. Mara only smiled and returned to her work, certain the seed would ask for time more than applause. Days stitched into months as she tended the furrow, carrying water in a simple skin, shading young shoots, and stacking pebbles to keep runoff from washing the soil away. Her neighbors made larger shows, building quick shelters or buying bright cloth that faded by autumn. But Mara returned each dawn to the slow craft of care. Gradually, the land took a different tone where her hands had been, quiet but steady. This was how she worked. It is told that elders watched her do this and remembered their own first efforts, words caught between admiration and misunderstanding. Some asked why she did not expand into grander fields, while others wondered if she would ever know comfort. Mara answered with no defense except a quiet steadiness, and that steadiness began to bend the valley's conversation toward curiosity. When the first season ripened, her single seed became a modest sprout, and then a stubborn sapling that shed its first leaves to the wind. The harvest was not lavish, but it sustained her and proved a promise she had made to herself. Small beginnings can keep a hand steady. Her neighbors watched, and some faces softened with new thinking. Perhaps small things are not small after all. A merchant offered Mara a quick trade, stones for grain and coins for immediate comfort, urging her to sell the plot and buy ease now. She weighed the offer but felt a stillness where her answer would be, sensing that quick ease might forestall a longer peace. So she declined and returned to the furrow with the same quiet hands. Another morning, another act of care awaited. The valley kept its breath, as if something patient had begun below the surface where eyes could not see. Roots gather strength in secret, and time stretches thin until change is ready. Mara walked home beneath a sky thick with possibility, carrying a small bundle and a belief wrapped in ordinary cloth. Beneath the ridge, things were quietly being set in motion. A season came without rain, and the valley cracked like an old pot. Wells grew thin, and the sky offered no counsel. Crops wilted, and loud solutions appeared, new trades, fast schemes, and frantic labor. But the water did not return to any hand that had not stored it before the drought. Mara measured each drop, remembering that small reserves can be the difference between survival and surrender. At the market, voices rose to mock those who had not sought grand spoils, and Mara's name slipped between jokes when people spoke of missed opportunity. She met the mockery with steady eyes, not anger, and kept counting small stores of grain and water that others had long since spent. When ridicule is loud, quiet action must be louder. She returned to her plot without a retort, gathering what she could. A neighbor, hungry for immediate relief, offered to trade his share of stored grain for her future claim on the plot. Fast comfort for uncertain later. Mara felt the pull of that trade, the way despair can make tomorrow's promise look thin, and she nearly wavered. Yet she imagined the sapling's small trunk and chose not to trade the future for the moment, a choice that tightened her resolve. That night, Mara lay awake, listening to the valley's slow breathing, and questions walked the dark like small animals. What if the soil could not yield what she hoped? What if time betrayed her? She rose before dawn, folding those doubts into practical tasks, and letting action answer fear rather than words alone. A neighbor who had pursued quick gains lost his meager stores when thieves came and the hasty shelter collapsed in a windstorm. The valley's talk shifted from boasting to hushed lament, and Mara's careful reserves looked suddenly like foresight rather than stubbornness. People began to ask more questions about how she saved and why she kept a measured pace, and curiosity replaced some ridicule. Mara established rituals: a day to mend, a day to store, a day to plant, a day to teach her youngest kin how to count and care. Those rituals were simple and repeatable, and they hardened into habits that could weather season after season, whether drought or plenty. Habits are the small pillars that hold a house of ease, and she began to share this practice quietly with a few who asked. Waiting became a skill she learned with intention, not a passive loss of time, but an active tending so that when change came, she would be ready. She taught children to weave a basket and to set aside one kernel for tomorrow, and in so doing, she made patience into a visible craft. Others began to imitate her, not from philosophy, but from the hunger to survive with dignity. As the drought wore on, hidden things beneath the soil kept their slow work roots seeking water, stores compacting into resilience, and those hidden things were quietly preparing a turning. Mara watched and measured and waited, certain that weather could change, but uncertain of when. She trusted in the accumulation itself. Beyond the ridge, something patient was rising toward a new season. One morning, the sky broke and rain arrived in a gentle, generous rhythm that the valley had not known in many months. Where others had no stores to catch it, the plots tended by ritual drank the water patiently, their soil welcoming and alive. Mara stood in the rain and felt it like an answer to a long conversation, and the valley's air smelled like new possibilities. Small saplings that had survived the drought swelled into thicker trunks and set deep roots that anchored the soil against future storms. The land altered gradually but undeniably, where care had been consistent, and terraces Mara had built began to hold water instead of letting it run away. The work of seasons finally spoke. A slow, practical growth became visible to all. Years folded into each other, and the single seed had multiplied into an orchard of varied trees that bore steady fruit and shade. The yield was not sudden riches, but reliable abundance: food for market, wood for repair, seeds for next year's planting. People began to trade differently. They no longer rushed to spend, but to invest a portion into shared stores, inspired by evidence rather than rhetoric. A season of plenty arrived, and with it a temptation for many to revert to old impulse, spend the surplus all at once on bright comforts. Mara called a meeting beneath the largest tree and suggested a different path. Set aside, share a little, and build a storehouse that could shelter the valley in lean years. The first sound was doubt, then a murmur, and then a slow resolve to try a new way. Together they built a low stone storehouse with shelves and a small hatch that could be opened in times of need, using the orchard surplus as mortar for their future. The building itself was modest, but the act of constructing it created an architecture of trust and shared purpose. Trust is a structure made by repeated proofs, and this house of stores became proof for their new habit. Mara gave a packet of seeds to the poorest child with a quiet instruction: plant half and save half, and teach your children to do the same. It was both a concrete gift and a test of an idea: can habits be taught by example? The child planting those seeds became a living question mark for the village, and parents watched how small learning might outlast a single life. As the orchard matured and the storehouse filled, the valley's rhythm shifted from frantic urgency to measured confidence, and people began to sleep with mouths less tight against hunger. The turning was not a single thunderclap, but a slow clarifying that comes after many patient acts. Mara looked at the trees and thought of small mornings long past, knowing the harvest was not only fruit, but a new way of living. Seasons settled into a kinder pattern, and the valley no longer rose every morning afraid of what the day might take. The orchard provided steady fruit, and the storehouse offered quiet reassurance for sudden storms, turning former panic into planning. Ease, when earned by many small mornings, arrived as a soft companion rather than a bright, fleeting guest. Mara became a teacher without a title, showing the young how to measure, save, and plant in ways that made their tomorrow less frightening. She used stories and small tasks, and she taught that patience is an active verb, something you practice, not merely wait for. The children learned, and their hands found the rhythms their elders had once discovered alone. Some who had prospered in silence chose to hoard, preferring private ease to shared futures, while others gave freely to repair a neighbor's shelter or seed a new plot. The community's choices revealed that abundance tests a people's heart. Will comfort be a private cloak or public shelter? The answer lay in actions, and many chose the latter, stitching their fortunes into the common cloth. Years later, the stone storehouse stood with ivy, and the orchard cast dappled shade on its face, a quiet monument to patient labor and shared trust. Travelers who passed told of a valley that had learned a different economy, one measured by time and habit rather than immediate spectacle. Some say Mara's greatest work was not the orchard or the storehouse, but the example of living a life that honors tomorrow. Mara walked the ridge at dusk and thought of small mornings, of seeds planted with patient hands, and of the many tiny choices that had assembled this life of ease. She saw neighbors who once mocked now teaching their own children to save and plant, and she felt that the valley had learned more than to harvest fruit. It had learned how to steward time. Reflection, she thought, is the harvest of a long practice. In the gathering beneath the oldest tree, Mara told a simple parable of a seed and a stone. Tend the seed, honor the stone, and the earth will give you what you cannot earn all at once. She spoke of daily measures, of the courage to refuse fleeting ease, and of building small stores for uncertain years, and the valley listened, as if remembering its own heartbeat. Their applause was quiet and steady, like the measure of true work. Thus the parable concludes. Mara's early efforts became the valley's later ease, and the quiet habit of tending turned scarcity into steady abundance. Learn to plant, to save, and to teach those who follow. The financial lessons are plain: start small, be consistent, build reserves, invest in durability, and share to multiply resilience, and these practices yield ease in years ahead. Carry this truth like seed in your pocket and let it root into the way you live.